Hi, it's Adrienne here, doing another Tarot and Tea. Today I have Yolanda with me, and Yolanda's got an interesting question that I thought we could explore together about the tarot cards. Hi, Yolanda.
Hi, Adrienne.
So you have an interesting question that I don't think we've covered before. Go ahead and ask me that question and tell me a little bit about why it's important to you.
Okay, well, so far with my trying to build a relationship with tarot, I've only been drawn to the major arcana because I'm drawn to the archetypes and the story that seems to unfold there, but I just have this kind of resistance to the minor because I don't yet understand their significance. So what I wanted to know is the difference between them, or the relationship between the major and the minor.
Okay, and I think that's a good question because the cards themselves are separated into two groups, and the major are a little bit more of the archetypal journey. So in the majors, you are experiencing what you say is kind of a journey of the soul, or the stories that unfold there. The minors themselves are different in that they'd more describe experiences. So I like to think of them more as something that is external. They're things that are happening to us, and as a result of that, we are learning more about not necessarily maybe our greater journey or greater sense of self, but how we operate. If you go back, think of it this way. If you go back to the magician, and in most traditional decks, the magician has a table in front of him or her, and on that table are the four different suits, right? So we have the wands and the cups and the pentacles and the swords, sometimes called other things. But in that place, the magician is teaching us about our sense of self or consciousness, and we are using these particular modes or these particular orientations to life, and that's what's represented in the minor arcana. Now, as far as the story is concerned, there are stories in the minor arcana as well, but that I think is also depicted in the imagery of each of those cards. So which deck are you working with?
Rider-Waite-Smith.
Okay, so in the Rider-Waite deck, for example, there's a lot of illustration in the minor arcana. And so when you're looking for a story, first, let me ask you, so when you talk about a story unfolding in the major, what do you mean? How do you understand the unfolding of the story?
So the way that I look at the major is kind of entering into like a different realm of consciousness. Like if I were to start at the Fool, like I think of it as not necessarily just incarnating into this life, but like going on this journey into like a new level of awareness, or this new journey of consciousness. Mm-hmm. And so I look at the different cards that follow of looking at the tools that we have available to us, mm-hmm. that we are really the answer, so to speak, but we have to go through all of these experiences of letting go, looking at what we're holding, mm-hmm. you know, mm-hmm. making certain choices and having these observations and awareness of who and what we are and what we're holding and what we choose to do with all of it. Mm-hmm. And so it's an interesting depiction to me mm-hmm. of like the tug of war that we have in this life experience in any given cycle of our life at any given time mm-hmm. that we're going through, like these stages of changes that we go through. So that makes it all very fascinating to me, and how you can look at it in order, but you can also look at it out of order, mm-hmm. and it still, I don't know, it just resonates so much to anyone's life experience.
Mm-hmm. I think what I hear in there that I'll try and correlate with the minor is, it sounds like what you're looking at with the majors is like stages of development, mm-hmm. that there's an order or there's a correlation to particular periods in a person's life. Right. But you're also saying in there that they can happen out of order as well. Mm-hmm. And in some way it's kind of the graduation of the soul. These are archetypal experiences that everybody goes through at some period and point in their life. So those stories themselves are human experiences.
Right.
So the minors then, if we take that and we say that, first of all, we divide all of the minors up and we say that they're depicted, or I should say composed, of four different suits. So we have the swords, which are correlated with air or the mind, thoughts. Pentacles, are connected to the material or sensations. We have cups, which is emotion and relationships, and then we have wands, which is energy and endeavors and fire, what we give our energy to. So if you notice, each of those suits is also composed of numbers, right? So numbers means what? If we start with 1 and end with 10, what does that tell you?
About the progression, the stages that we go through.
Right. Similar to what we're seeing with the archetypes.
Right.
I think the difference is that instead of this being something that might be an internal unfolding, it's something that we experience outside of ourselves. So just think of it in a really basic form like maturity. You know, if you, let's take for example, well, you give me an example. Give me an example of any of the aces.
The one that's coming to mind that I think it's the ace, the one that has the sword coming. I think it's the ace of swords, but there's a cloud around it. Yeah, that one really stands out to me in terms of like what the symbolism may be with the cloud, because it could be hidden information. To me, the cloud could be confusion. It could be so many different things.
And I think if you take that, first of all, what you just did, I think, is the most important thing. The stories in the cards, and this is why I love the cards, is that the stories in the cards are whatever you project on the cards. And the Rider-Waite is a really good example because there is so much symbolism and they're illustrated in such a way that you can project into them your own stories. They don't have to necessarily follow an archetypal journey in the same way that you might have experienced with the majors. But even in the Ace of Swords, as you just said, you know, the clouds are there and maybe there's something that's a little bit hidden. Okay, for you, that might be something that really resonates. If we take the swords by itself and we say that we have this one, or we have this something that's emerging out of nothing, you think about it in terms of like ideas and thoughts. And can you think of a time in your life when suddenly like a major thought dawned upon you?
All the time.
Lucky you, right? Right? So, and sometimes those thoughts are disturbing. They're not always aha moments, but sometimes they're disturbing thoughts.
Yes.
And that swords then indicates in its like rawest form is the purest form of that energy. Swords often have, and you can start to learn that there is some symbolism that just goes well. So clouds, you're going to see, if you lay out all the swords, you'll see that clouds are depicted a lot in there because there's something to do with air, right? And clouds. That really captures the significance of swords. So I think that the cloud in that one is more a depiction of an associated symbol, because the Ace of Swords in and of itself is a major sword coming out of that cloud, right? There's clarity in misunderstanding. And if we didn't have our mind, then we wouldn't really be able to see anything. There would be no discernment in anything. So if you take, we started with the Ace of Swords and we move through, the Ace of Swords being that initial thought, it turns into something else in the Two of Swords, right? Now that element of one becomes two. And so that idea might meet another form, another thought or idea, or it might actually be communicated to another individual, right? So now one has moved to two, which suggests that there's a development or a progression in that area. To your initial question, though, how does that maybe story differ from the majors, is that all the minor arcana, I see them as being external. They're things that are happening outside of us. Even if a thought is something that arises within us, that thought is something that's then either being transmitted to another person, translated through another experience. But in any case, we want to get from 1 to 10, and then through the embodiment of the court cards, there's a maturity that has to happen. Can you imagine if you acted on every single idea that you ever had?
Oh my God.
Do you know how many ideas you even have in one day? I mean, it's incredible, right? So that idea has to take form through, or I should say maturity, because form gives, the idea of pentacles. It's got to move through the stage of 2, where it's maybe challenged, or it becomes reconciled or balanced in some way. 3, it might be communicated or expanded upon or studied. 4, it becomes consolidated. It becomes something that's grounded, and this is what I'm going to work on or act from. 5, it meets some sort of change or challenge. It has to be progressed or expanded or reformed in some way, often through like a challenge through another person. 6, it ends up turning into or creating from its original form into something else. 7, it becomes something then that there's an identification with or challenging from the outside force. And if you look at all the cards, at least in the Rider-Waite, the story tells this.
Yeah.
But it tells it through your lens, which is most important.
Right.
I think the Seven of Swords is actually a good example of that. But as it moves through each of these, the story is more that it's unfolding and growing and maturing until it comes to 10. So what do you expect in like the 10 of any of those? Any of the suits?
Realization of whatever that suit is, or a deeper understanding of what it is. Kind of like even the word that you said before, it comes to mind, like maturing through whatever it is. Yeah. I have another question, but I'll wait till your next tarot and tea.
Does it relate?
Yeah, so I mean, when you're saying this, it reminds me of two. I mean, well, it's more of a question. So, is it kind of like, as you're saying this, I'm seeing the majors as like the roles and the characters that we play almost, whereas this is how we work out the different aspects of those characters in a way. Do you know what I mean?
I think so. I think that's a good point. I mean, if you think about the majors as being the context, right? So using the idea of archetypes, the archetypes are in some way a type of being. Let's just take, for example, the Empress. The Empress is the archetype of nurturing mother in the obvious form. But when you start to combine it with the particular minors, it's like how that's unfolding. If we're talking about the archetype of the mother and we bring in, or nurturing for that matter, and we bring in the association of the swords, then this is going to then suggest maybe an element of thoughts or ideas that we're nurturing, that we are communicating in some way, versus like if it's cups, now this becomes maybe something that we are nurturing or loving or connecting with. So yes, to your point, I think that the minors are the tools, go back to the magician, the tools that we use in order to integrate each of those archetypes. Because as you know, like, you don't just go through the stages of these different majors and archetypes and be done with them, right? It's circuitous. It's a constant journey through versus just being something like, okay, one and done, right? But the minors are the tools. That's how we come to, the best word I have is integrate. Those archetypal experiences. And we're constantly doing it. And you probably know people that are like what we say, oh, that person's very intellectual or that person's very emotional. So the minors will help, and this is where you can actually use the cards to your benefit. If you lack in water, so for example, like the emotion, the connection, you can use the tarot cards then to what process am I in this? Like, how can I better connect or understand my own emotional stage of development? Then you turn over like those minors and the cups, and that gives you, I think, a way to apply it to what, to where you are in your life. Make sense?
Makes complete sense.
Yeah. So you think you're going to use the minors now?
I am. With the new lens. Now, thank you so much for that.
Yep, you're very welcome. Okay, if you have any questions about tarot cards, or you want to discuss anything, send me an email or go ahead and visit me online, and I would love to engage in a dialogue about tarot. Thanks, Yolanda.
Thank you.